Hello and welcome to episode number 76 of the Frozen North Gaming Podcast, Trinity Sight. Mark, what does that mean we're talking about today?
That means we're talking about Trinity from The Matrix and all the things she saw,
like from her perspective.
That's not right. That's not even close to what we're talking about here.
Well, we're actually talking about Suikoden 3.
Yes, we are. My name is JJ, if you haven't heard us before, and I'm here with my two good friends, Mark.
Howdy, y'all!
And Brian.
Howdy, y'all, in a more respectable manner.
I'm respectable.
We are a podcast talking about video games, and today we are going to be talking about Suikoden 3. It's going to be an episode devoted entirely to it. If you've heard our last two episodes that we have done with the Suikoden series for the first and second games in the series, you know that we have our friend Ryan from the Suikoden Revival Movement come on and talk to us a little bit about the game, and today will be no different. He's going to be here a little bit later on in the episode, and we got some great things to talk about, and it's going to be a whole lot of fun. We are here with our buddy Ryan from over at the Suikoden Revival Movement. Ryan, what's going on, man?
Hey, everyone. Man, it's glad to be back. It's been almost a year to the day since I was last on the show.
Yeah,
my
it's
third
been a
time
while.
now.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you told me that you've listened to other episodes that we've done, and so I'm a little embarrassed because you've heard me gush about how interesting I think you are. So you're my hero.
Well, you know, I have a confession to make. I am actually the love child of Soren Kierkegaard and Mahatma Gandhi.
There you go. That explains
that's
everything.
Why I'm so great.
That explains everything.
Now it makes sense.
It all makes sense. So I mean, you know, before we get into the whole Suikoden 3 thing, what's been going on with you? What's been going on with the SRM? Can you give us any updates?
Well, a lot's changed in the last year. We got Suikoden 2 released worldwide on the PlayStation Network, as well as Suikoden 1, which was only available previously in North America. So that's worldwide. And Suikoden 3 was also released worldwide with the exception of Australia and New Zealand. But just yesterday morning, the Australian Classifications Board finally submitted its rating for Suikoden 3, and a few hours later, Konami announced a release date for Australia and New Zealand for Suikoden 3 on the PSN.
That's
for
great.
PS3. So yeah, we're really excited about that, especially because we had no clue what to do if it was the Australian Classifications Board holding things up, right? Because they're a rather infamously inflexible organization.
Brian wanted me to ask you if they're going to be retranslating that to Australian.
No, they're not going to be retranslating it to Australian, as amazing as that would be.
I don't know, mate. That'd be great.
Oh,
you could have all of the Koreans just be talking like the Outback accents.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, the Zexans would talk in the Melbourne or Brisbane accents.
Mark,
right?
what's a creature in the game that's like looks kind of like a dingo?
A griffin.
The griffin.
Griffin looks nothing like.
I don't know what a dingo looks
The
like.
griffin ate ya baby.
A griffin ate my baby.
Mark, you don't know what a dingo looks like? It's a dog.
Oh.
Basically.
Yeah, no, it's a small dog.
Yeah.
There are quite a few small dogs in the game.
Yeah, there's dogs in the game.
What are they called?
Dogs.
Oh, God, Mark.
Oh my goodness. Cool. So I mean, anything else with the SRM, or is that you get pretty much just
by the time this podcast goes live, we will have closed our questions for the second round of our Murayama interview. The original creator of the Suikoden series, Yoshitaka Murayama, is doing a second interview with us. But by the time this goes live, unfortunately, we'll have gathered all the questions and closed out. But hopefully in the next few months, Murayama will get back to us and we will publish a second interview with him.
Sweet.
So,
have you guys had a pretty good turnout as far as questions being submitted so far?
yeah, we have. We've got some really great questions from the community. We've also got the Japanese fan base going on questions with Murayama. So that's really fun too, to see their perspective on the series and what they want to ask him.
Definitely. Cool. All right. Well, we'll definitely be keeping a close eye out and looking for that interview and anything else you guys are going to be doing in the near future. Where I think what the next move is, we're looking at trying to get Suikoden 4 released on the PSN.
Yeah, Suikoden 4 and 5 and Suikoden Tactics are basically next on the list. It's going to be somewhat difficult to do that, though, because, well, just generally, we're waiting for Sony to announce PlayStation Network support for the PS4, right? Because PS3 is on the way out.
Yep.
Let's be honest. It still has a few games coming out for it, and it's still good. I still have mine, and I'm going to keep mine for a while. But without any kind of PSN on the PS4, this is going to be a problem. Now, recently there have been rumors, and Sony has confirmed that some PS2 games are going to be emulated on the PS4. They're doing this for some of the Star Wars games, some of the old PS2 Star Wars games. But they haven't made an official announcement yet. We feel that at the PlayStation Experience event that they have going on in December, I think it's December 5th and 6th, they will announce some kind of backwards compatibility for the PS4 in emulation. And we'll have to see exactly what form this emulation takes before we can come up with a concrete path of how to move forward. So
cool. Yeah, well, we'll definitely keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, so Suikoden 3. I mean, this game was quite a bit different from the other two, and not only in the fact that A was 3D, but also, and we might touch on this a little bit later, but you don't have a silent protagonist as the main character as well.
That's right. No silent protagonist, and we will probably talk about that later if we have time.
Definitely. And we kind of, like I said, we did the review on the game a little bit ago with just the three of us sitting here, and we talked about, the Trinity Sight system, and I absolutely think it's one of the best ways that I've seen in a game to tell a story, just because I love that multiple viewpoint aspect of it. And we kind of the whole thing with starting out as Hugo and seeing this knight just kill your best friend. It's like, she is awful. How could she burn my village and do this? And then you play from her point of view, and it's like, oh, wow, that's not what I thought it was at all. Holy crap.
Yeah.
So, and just that kind of interaction all throughout the game was fantastic. So, I mean, I think, speaking of that night, I think that's the first thing that you wanted to touch on with us was Chris Lightfellow, the main female character in the game. I'm pretty much going to just open the floor to you, man, and kind of let you do your thing.
Okay, well, one thing that I think Suikoden 3 does better than any other game in the series is show how complex reality can be, right? And with Chris Lightfellow, that's certainly true. As you mentioned, the Trinity Sight system mechanic allows you to kind of see this war develop from three different viewpoints. One is the viewpoint of Chris, one is the viewpoint of Hugo, and the other is a viewpoint of a mercenary named Ghetto. And this is an excellent way to show how complex this developing conflict between Zexen Nation and the Grasslands is. Chris, especially, is a very interesting character to me. Well, all three are very interesting characters to me, but Chris especially, because what she says about the way in which Suikoden handles things like gender politics and other gender issues is really very intelligent, and I think the modern gaming, the modern institution, the modern industry of gaming could learn a lot from it. So, for example, one of the first scenes in her first chapter is her returning to her hometown of Vinay del Zexe and meeting with the civilian council which oversees the Knights. And she has become the acting captain of the Knights because her two male superiors in the military perished in battle versus the Grasslands. And immediately it becomes clear that the civilian government is attempting to use Chris Lightfellow not as she should be used, but rather as a disposable hero who loses her life in battle. And that way they can use her as propaganda to support their own rule, as opposed to, any kind of sane or morally acceptable use of their knights, right? Mm-hmm. And use of their military power. And this says a lot about how Suikoden in general approaches the issue of gender. And that is to say, it doesn't approach the issue of gender. It boldly ignores the concept of gender, actually. And I think it's really interesting because Chris is a very loyal person. She's very loyal to the Knights and to her home country. And the civilian council just wants to use that to effectively, split up the grasslands and claim much of the territory for their own. And and they intended to use her male predecessors for the exact same purpose. To show how Suikoden 3 and the Suikoden series in general deals with the issues of gender, it helps to go all the way back to Suikoden 1. And just a little scene back in Suikoden 1 between two characters named Cleo and Hicks. In Suikoden 1, there is one village where there's actually pretty strictly defined gender roles in this village. And it's called the Warriors Village, where men become warriors and women,
I do remember that. Yep.
whatever happens. And there's one young warrior boy who meets a female warrior named Cleo, and he asks her, why does she fight? This is very strange to me to see a woman warrior fighting. And what Cleo replies as, she basically just says, hey, look, there are many things that I wish to fight for in the exact same way that there are many things you wish to fight for. So why does the fact that I'm a woman and you are a man enter into it? And so what she does in that line is she actually just boldly dismisses Hicks's very concept of gender. Not necessarily even saying that men and women are equal, but rather just saying that
it's irrelevant to point out whether they're equal or not.
Yeah, it's irrelevant. And there are so many wider things in this world to consider, and so many deeper problems in our society that when you get right down to it, men and women don't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of plumbing you may have, right?
Yeah.
Just straight up, it's about who you are inside. And in many ways, this is the exact same attitude that carried into Suikoden 3, only I think much more fully expressed. Yeah, much more fully expressed in Suikoden 3, where it becomes apparent that the political problems between the Zexen Knights and the Zexen Council are much, much deeper than any kind of gender issue that could come forward. And it's funny because the fact that she's a female commander is barely ever brought up in the game. Like nobody even seems to care, right? It's just her sheer skill obviously makes her qualified, and no one even really brings it up. So, but yeah, and it helps to show too that the Suikoden approach is to boldly just ignore the concept of gender, because in these stories there are wars going on and deep problems in society that make gender and gender issues simply irrelevant in the face of these things. And I think that's really, in my opinion, the best approach, because if you take a game where you have a female heroine and, all the different characters in the game are saying, oh, you can't do that because you're a woman. And, they're very sexist and very misogynist like that.
Yeah, well, I think if I can interject, I think the opposite's true too. I think a game that truly wants to be a game that's like gender equal is they, like you said, they ignore it. It's not where the the female character walks in like I am a strong woman. Like they don't point it out. Like even if it's like even if it's in the opposite vein, if they're not being derogatory towards a woman, but if that game takes it the other way and goes, well, let's prop them up, then it's still misogynist, just in an opposite way, where it's like I'm a woman and I am strong. It's like, well, if you just ignore it and you just say,
that's like step one. They're so far beyond the issue of gender inequality that they don't even have to frame it anymore. It's just
that's exactly
everyone's
right.
equal.
Yep. That's exactly right. Yep, absolutely.
Or everyone's individual.
They don't even mention it because it's not something that's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
And games that put in strong female protagonists who are always told they can't do things because they're women are obviously really just pandering to women rather than, which is exactly what women don't want. They don't want to be pandered to, or at least most women that I know don't want to be pandered to.
Absolutely.
They want to be treated as an equal, as a true equal. And in this game, in Suikoden 3, Chris has attained equality, but at quite a price because, she's intended to die on the battlefield. So it's just, it's really wonderful how Suikoden has always handled the concept of gender, in my opinion. And I think we could learn a lot from it. Roughly throughout the history of the games, if you add up all the women, roughly 40% of the characters are women. It's really, really good for Suikoden.
I never even thought of that, but yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And as far as the fan base, as far as we can tell, roughly 40% of the fan base is women as well at the SRM. So
That's cool.
That's yeah. I mean, and it goes to show, in the real world that women respond to these types of things. They respond positively to someone who doesn't pander to them and who treats them like an equal, like the Suikoden games do.
Absolutely.
And there are female antagonists in the game as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. We kind of, when we were talking about it before, Brian hasn't played the game all the way through, but we spoiled it a little bit for him as far as who the antagonist was and everything, and talked about that aspect. We didn't go into the detail with the female one, who's there with him and by his side, and that whole scene at the end is pretty incredible too.
Yeah.
With the two of them, but I don't know. I think this is just another reason why this series is so great and showing that it goes beyond the norm. You've got situations like this where there's so many games, like Brian said, that tout strong female characters, which is great, but this game shows you that in order to show that you can have a strong female character, let alone a lead, you don't have to put them front and center and make them announce that they're a strong female character.
Exactly. Anytime you like bring it to light positively or negatively, you're basically saying like, "Hey, we're doing this to appeal to women.
Right?
Look, they're strong."
Yeah.
Like, no, a game that's truly equal, they won't even mention that aspect. It's just like assumed, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And other games have done this too. Like Silent Hill 3 has a very strong female protagonist, in my opinion, but it doesn't really harp on it. It's just a thing that happens. To boldly ignore the concepts of gender
Correct.
is, in my opinion, the best way to do it.
Yes.
And I want to bring this up to a situation from real life that happened back in 40 AD, or CE if you prefer that, all the way back almost 2,000 years ago. Something interesting happened in Nam Viet, which is today what we call the northern part of Vietnam, where we actually had it's the first recorded instance in world history of a fully gender equal army and military command. And it's really interesting to learn about this because it goes to show just how much gender roles and the concept of gender are parts of our society, right? They're imposed on us by the society, and to a certain extent, they don't mean anything in the real world. What happened in Vietnam in 40 AD is the Chinese invaded and took over the northern part of the country, and they executed a young official whose name was Trung, and because he was opposing their occupation, essentially. And what happened is Trung's husband, whose name is Trung Troc, and her sister, whose name is Trung Nhi, united the rebels and actually fought back against the Chinese occupation. And so the army was a fully gender equal army led by two women, two sisters, Trung Troc and Trung Nhi, and they actually succeeded in fighting off the entire Chinese army that was in the area occupying and freeing northern Vietnam from Chinese occupation. And they had a fully gender equal army with many male generals under their command, as well as many female generals under their command. And they succeeded for a while in holding off the Chinese. But unfortunately, and this is important, this story does not have a happy ending, because the Chinese were so outraged that a woman or that women could drive them away from northern Vietnam that they came back in 42 AD, 2 years later. And they came back in force because the Chinese quite obviously had a much larger, much more well-organized military.
Right.
They came back in force and they reconquered northern Vietnam, and both Trung Troc and Trung Nhi died in battle. Or according to some stories, they actually took their own lives when they saw that the battle was lost. And that's actually really important because it shows that even if you have gender equality, it's not immediately going to turn the world into a utopia. It's not going to be gender equality and then everything is perfect. No. There are some severe, as I said before, there are severe, serious problems in society that are far beyond gender. And Suikoden 3, just like the story of the Trung Rebellion, shows this. just like in real life. It echoes the Turing Rebellion, and I think that's a really important point to bring up.
It's just another example of how this series shows you that not all situations are just black and white. There are so many gray areas out there.
I was going to say the same thing. It's like this series doesn't have strong female characters. This series has strong characters in general.
Right.
Absolutely.
And one thing I want to bring up too is that not only with things like, invasions and occupying armies, but also with general social catastrophes, it's interesting that when societies become stressed to the breaking point, they often start seeing much greater levels of gender equality. For example, during the Black Plague in Europe, this would be, roughly the 1300s, roughly half of England's population died. It was terrible. But what happened, conversely, is that women started being gainfully employed as things like bricklayers, carpenters, builders, and things where are quote-unquote gender roles. You wouldn't think that women in the Middle Ages, women in what a lot of people call the Dark Ages, would actually pursue those types of jobs, but they did. There are actually paintings of women building a church by laying brick by brick, and a lot of women actually got onto trade guild roles as well, and became members of trade guilds during the aftermath of the Black Plague, as society started to stabilize, but the population was still much, much lower than it had been previously. And this goes to show that I think that gender inequality is something of a societal luxury. And I'm using the term luxury in the negative sense, right? Like luxury is a bad thing. It's a societal luxury that in order to oppress half of your population, you have to expend some tremendous amount of societal energy. And when your society is stressed to the breaking point, either through disease or through invasion and occupation, then you no longer have enough spare energy to just oppress half of your population.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
now,
First world problems.
Whoa. Oh, boy.
Yeah, well, actually, you know what? Gender inequality might very well be a first world problem. Yeah. In fact, there are some archaeological evidence that the Indus Valley civilization, which is like 2000 BC or something, a long time ago, actually had gender equality, simply because they didn't have the kind of societal institutions that we have, and they didn't have the kind of support that we do today.
So I wanted to ask if you have any thoughts on Alma Kinan. Is that how you say it?
Alma Kinan? Yeah. Oh, Alma Kinan is actually a very interesting place in the game. For those who don't know, it's a village of all women hunters inside the game. And, of course, Chris travels there during her Chapter 3, because it's much more interesting to have Chris, who is a woman, travel there than Hugo or Ghetto. It is kind of like, well, almost the exact opposite of the Warriors Village from Suikoden 1, right? Which was this very male-dominated society. And in Alma Kinan in Chris's Chapter 3, we see a female-dominated society that is by no means a utopia, at least by our concepts, because not to spoil too much, but they do practice human sacrifice in this village. And it really blindsides you, right? And it completely... And it's handled in a very interesting way, because it blindsides you. You don't see it coming. And also it goes to show not only that, foreign cultures will have entirely different gender roles, entirely different societies than yours. And in the end, basically what happens is, since the child sacrifice is actually very willing and indeed quite not just willing, but actually very excited to be sacrificed. Essentially,
I do
what
remember
happens
that.
is
Yeah,
Chris and Nash stand down and they allow it to occur because, just because it's not their place to say that this is wrong or right for this very isolated village.
absolutely.
And it goes to show again, that with gender equality, it's not immediately going to be a utopia, right? There's going to be other severe problems going on. So
Definitely.
Well, we're all human.
And do you have any theories about how they continue their lineage in that village, since it's very hidden and private?
Well, I think they clearly have elven magic in the village because, for example, in Suikoden 5 and Suikoden 1, there are areas of the world map and the world that are locked off by elven magic that human beings have very difficult time passing through. It's kind of like an illusion. You kind of go around in circles and then you come back. What I think is that the Almakinen are probably half human, half elves, and they just live for a very long time. Yeah.
Cool.
And so I think, or maybe, who knows? I mean, nobody knows anything about the elven civilizations in Suikoden at all, or how they reproduce at all. So, for all we know, elves could basically be more plant than animal, you know, and they could just reproduce, you know, generally like that. So.
Hey, we're all about plant equality too. So
plant quality. It's my new movement. Hashtag plant quality. Hashtag Mark.
Oh man.
Like, yo, bro, I'm gonna put some of that lemon juice in my hair and get that bleach.
Then he went and he grabbed his surfing board.
Yeah, bro, it's gonna be great. I'm Hugo. What up, bro? I'm Hugo.